Okay, let's unpack this. You brought us some fascinating sources today, really diving into one of history's great riddles, the fate of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, this object, so central to ancient Israelite belief, it just vanished. Or
Mm.
did it?
Right, a disappearance that sparked, well, everything from Hollywood blockbusters to serious academic debate for, gosh, millennia.
Absolutely. Countless theories,
Mhm.
searches, you name it.
Exactly. But the material you shared with us, it zeroes in on one really powerful, uh, deeply held tradition, the claim that the Ark wasn't lost at all.
No, that it actually made its way to Ethiopia, and it's believed to be there right now, today.
So we're drawing from recent research, some historical accounts, and importantly, the traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church itself, all based on the sources you've given us for this deep dive.
That's the plan. We want to really get into the core arguments, the history behind it, and crucially, why this belief is so important culturally and religiously in Ethiopia.
Think of this as your shortcut, pulling the most interesting bits directly from this material, cutting through some of the noise to get you the key insights.
We'll guide you through it, point out what really stands out, what might surprise you.
Okay, so before we jump into the Ethiopia connection, let's just quickly recap what the Ark actually was, according to biblical
Rah.
tradition, just to set the stage.
Good idea. So in the Old Testament, the ark wasn't just, a fancy box. It was understood as the physical manifestation, the symbol of God's actual presence with the Israelites.
Looked like God's throne on earth almost.
In a way, yes, representing divine kingship among the people. The sources mention Exodus 25, right? Giving details on how it was made.
Yeah, acacia wood covered in gold, that mercy seat on top with the two golden cherubim facing each other.
Exactly. And inside, Hebrews 9 mentions the contents, the stone tablets, the Ten Commandments.
Aaron's rod that budded, that jar of manna. These weren't just random souvenirs.
Not at all. They were potent symbols of the covenant between God and Israel, reminders of his power, his provision, his law.
And it wasn't just kept in storage. Its function was vital, housed in the absolute holiest place, the Holy of Holies.
Right inside the tabernacle, later the temple, only the high priest could go in there, and only once a year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement.
Wow. Intense.
Very. And it wasn't just stationary, it was carried into battle sometimes, remember? The story of Jericho in the book of
Mhm.
Joshua. It was seen as leading the way, representing God's power and protection.
So symbolically huge. The covenant, God's presence, his kingship, the meeting point between heaven and earth. It's hard to overstate its importance.
Absolutely central.
Yeah,
Which makes its disappearance even more striking.
right. So biblical history tells us it was there in the first temple in Jerusalem, and then.
And then silence. The last sort of reliable mentions are before the Babylonians destroyed that temple in 586 BC. After that, the historical trail just goes cold.
A massive void, which naturally opens the door for other explanations.
Exactly. And that brings us squarely to the Ethiopian claim.
Okay, so the core belief here, based on your sources,
The central claim of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is that the Ark was not lost or destroyed. It was rescued, essentially, and brought to Axum, their ancient capital in northern Ethiopia.
and they believe it's still there.
Yes, housed within the grounds of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. That's the tradition.
And this isn't just some fringe idea over there, is it?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
not at all. It's incredibly deep-seated. It's woven into the very fabric of Ethiopian religious life and national identity. It signifies God's presence,
Mhm.
his favor on their nation.
The sources say the tradition names a specific person responsible for bringing it there.
That's right. Menelik I. He's believed to be the son of King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba, who they call Makeda.
Solomon and Sheba. Okay, that's a huge connection right there.
It is, and this connection forms the basis of the whole story. But here's where it gets really intriguing, especially for outsiders.
The secrecy.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The Ark isn't in the main church building. It's supposedly kept in a small, separate chapel nearby. And access is, well, extremely restricted.
To just one person, right? The guardian.
Yes, a specially appointed monk, the guardian of the Ark. He lives a life of almost total seclusion, dedicated to protecting it, and according to tradition, he is the only living person allowed to actually see the Ark.
Wow. So no photos, no scientific tests, no independent verification possible.
None whatsoever. And that's the crux of the issue for many. It creates this intense mystery, this reverence for believers, But obviously, it fuels a lot of skepticism from historians and others because there's just no way to check.
It forces it into the realm of faith, essentially.
Entirely.
Okay, so let's get into the story itself. How did it supposedly get there?
Oh.
The sources point to a specific text, right?
Yes, the Keber Nagast. It translates to the glory of kings. It's a foundational Ethiopian text.
How old is it?
Well, scholars generally date the written form we have to around the 14th century, maybe a bit earlier, but it clearly draws on much, much older oral traditions.
And this book tells the story.
It does. It expands on the biblical story you mentioned, the Queen of Sheba or Makeda visiting King Solomon in Jerusalem.
Where she was impressed by his wisdom and wealth.
Right. The Keber Nagast adds a crucial element, that during her visit, she and Solomon had a son, Menelik.
Okay, and he was raised in Ethiopia.
Yes. Then, as a young man, the story goes, he travels to Jerusalem to meet his father, Solomon.
And Solomon recognizes him.
Welcomes him, wants him to stay, even offers him the throne of Israel eventually. But Menelik feels called to return to Ethiopia.
So Solomon lets him go.
Yes, but he doesn't send him alone. Solomon orders the firstborn sons of his own priests and nobles, the elite of Israel, to accompany Menelik back to Ethiopia, to establish a parallel kingdom in a way.
Okay, so far it sounds like a state visit with an honor guard, but then comes the twist.
Here's the massive twist, according to the Keber Nagast. These young Israelite companions, apparently worried about leaving the divine protection of the ark behind, or maybe believing its presence was essential for the new kingdom.
They did what?
They secretly conspired to take the Ark of the Covenant with them, without telling Menelik, and certainly without telling Solomon.
Wait, they stole the ark? The holiest object in Israel. How is that even possible in the story?
The text suggests divine assistance, making guards fall asleep, that sort of thing. The key point is, they believe they were doing God's will, ensuring his presence when with them.
And Menelik finds out later.
According to the legend, yes. Once they're well on their journey back to Ethiopia, the truth comes out. And instead of outrage, Menelik and his companions embrace it. They interpret it as a sign that God wanted the ark to go to Ethiopia.
So divine will overrides the theft aspect.
That's how the narrative frames it. They see it as a transfer of divine favor. Guided by God, they bring the ark safely back to Axum.
And the tradition holds it's been there ever since.
That's the belief. It's more than just an adventure story. It's the foundational myth explaining the origins of the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia, which ruled for centuries, and positioning Ethiopia as the new protector of God's covenant.
This really puts Ethiopia's unique history and religious background into perspective, doesn't it? The sources touch on this connection.
Absolutely. There's this fascinating layer of pre-Christian Jewish influence in Ethiopia.
You mean the Beta Israel community, the Ethiopian Jews?
Exactly. Their origins are debated, lost tribes maybe, or a very early local adoption of Jewish practices. But their presence, following ancient Jewish customs like Sabbath observance and dietary laws, shows a deep old connection between Ethiopia and Judaism, long before Christianity arrived.
Which kind of adds another layer of plausibility, or at least context, to the Solomon and Sheba story for Ethiopians.
It certainly provides a historical backdrop for that connection, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church sees the Ark's arrival as fitting into this pattern, fulfilling God's plan for Ethiopia. They believe they were chosen to safeguard it.
And then Christianity arrives. Ethiopia adopted it very early, didn't it?
Remarkably early, it became the state religion back in the 4th century AD under King Ezana of Axum, one of the very first kingdoms to do so.
Thanks to figures like Frumentius, the Syrian missionary.
Right, who became their first bishop, Abba Salama. And because Ethiopian Christianity developed somewhat separately from, say, Rome or Constantinople, it kept some unique features.
Including incorporating some of those older Jewish or pre-Christian elements.
Yes, you see that in their practices. And for the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the Ark isn't just an Old Testament relic. It's profoundly important. They see it as representing God's covenant, yes, but also as a symbol pointing towards Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of that covenant.
So it bridges the Old and New Testaments for them in a very tangible way.
Precisely. This mix, the early Christianity, the deep connection to the Ark legend and ancient Israel, the unique traditions, it really gives Ethiopian Christianity a special place.
And the physical center of all this is the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum.
That's the spot, considered the holiest site in Ethiopia, a powerful symbol of their ancient faith, and of course, the place where the Ark is believed to rest.
It's got a long history itself, hasn't it? Built, destroyed, rebuilt.
Several times over the centuries. The original church dates back to King Ezana in the 4th century. It was destroyed, likely in the 10th century, rebuilt, and the large cathedral many see today was built by Emperor Haile Selassie in the 20th century.
But its importance comes from the Ark connection.
Overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
That association elevates it beyond almost any other site. It symbolizes that direct link to biblical Israel and their distinct Christian identity.
And next to it is the specific building, the Chapel of the Tablet.
Yes, a small, unassuming, but heavily guarded structure. That's where the Ark itself is said to be kept. The most sacred spot within the sacred complex.
And famously, nobody gets in.
Nobody except the guardian. The sources stress this strict tradition. The chapel itself is simple, almost plain from the outside, emphasizing its sacred, hidden nature.
That secrecy, as we said, fuels mystery for believers, but also skepticism for others. It keeps it holy by keeping it separate.
It's a core part of the belief surrounding it.
Let's talk more about that guardian role. It sounds extraordinary.
It really is. This monk is chosen for what's considered the highest religious honor, but also an immense burden of responsibility within the Ethiopian church.
The sole caretaker.
The sole protector and caretaker of the Ark. And once appointed, that's it. He lives in almost complete isolation within the chapel compound for the rest of his life.
He can't leave, ever.
Cannot leave the grounds. His entire existence becomes dedicated to prayer, maintaining the chapel, and ensuring no unauthorized person ever gets near the Ark.
How is he chosen? Is that public knowledge?
No, that's also shrouded in secrecy. When the current guardian passes away, a successor is chosen from among the monks of the monastery of St. Mary of Zion. The exact process isn't widely known.
It's seen as a divine calling, then, a continuation of the ancient priesthood.
Very much so, a spiritual successor to the Levites who guarded the Ark in the Old Testament. The seclusion isn't seen as a punishment, but as necessary to protect the overwhelming sanctity of the Ark.
The sources mention the church often brings up the story of Uzzah from the Bible.
Yes, 2 Samuel. Uzzah just reached out to steady the Ark when the oxen stumbled, and he was struck dead instantly for touching it.
Wow. So they take that as a literal warning. This thing is too holy, too powerful for ordinary human contact or examination.
Exactly. For believers, the secrecy isn't suspicious, it's essential reverence. It's about protecting not just the object, but people from the object's raw holiness.
Which brings us back to that core tension. Reverence versus verification.
It's unavoidable. It keeps the Ark firmly in the category of faith.
Now, related to this deep reverence for the original Ark, there's something called the Tablet. Tell us about that.
The tablet, yes. This is incredibly important. The tablet is essentially a consecrated replica of the Ark of the Covenant.
And every Ethiopian Orthodox church has one.
Every single one. It's the most sacred object within any given church, usually made of wood or stone, sometimes inscribed. It represents the divine presence, God's covenant, right there in their local church.
Where is it kept?
It's housed in the church's own Holy of Holies, called Makaz. No church can even be consecrated without a tablet. It's seen as a direct link back to the Ark in Axum, channeling its authority and presence.
So these replicas are treated with similar reverence.
Absolutely. They are the focal point of worship, hidden from view most of the time, brought out for special processions. It's a way of continuing that Old Testament temple tradition within their Christian worship. It's a living connection.
And the most famous time we see the tablets is during Timcat, right?
Definitely. Timcat, the celebration of Epiphany, Jesus' baptism, usually January 19th or 20th. It's a huge, colorful, deeply spiritual festival.
What happens with the tablets then?
It's quite spectacular. On the eve of Timcat, called Ketra, the tablets from all the churches in an area are carried out in procession.
Carried out openly.
No, they're always veiled, wrapped in rich fabrics. You don't see the tablet itself. Priests carry them on their heads, accompanied by chanting, drumming, incense, prayers. It's very atmospheric.
Where do they take them?
They process to a designated body of water, a pool, a river symbolizing the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. They hold an all-night vigil there with prayers and hymns.
And then the baptism part.
At dawn, the main ceremony happens. A priest blesses the water, often dipping a ceremonial cross. Then, worshippers are sprinkled with the blessed water, or some might even immerse themselves as a renewal of their own baptismal vows.
That sounds incredibly moving.
It is. And after the ceremony, the tablets are carried back to their respective churches in another joyful procession, celebrating the return of God's presence to the sanctuary, the Maktas.
So the tablet isn't just a symbol. It's treated as a vessel of divine presence and power. much like the original Ark was.
Precisely. Theologically, it represents God's presence, the fulfillment of the Old Covenant in Christ, and a source of blessing and protection for the community.
It really brings that ancient history alive in the present day for them.
It does. Carrying the tablet is like participating in that biblical reality, invoking God's guidance and protection.
Okay, so that's the tradition, the belief, the practice. It's incredibly rich. But the sources also make clear there's significant doubt and skepticism about the core claim the Ark actually being in Axum.
Oh, absolutely. From a purely scholarly or archaeological viewpoint, there are major questions. The biggest one is simply the lack of external verifiable evidence.
Starting with the Kebra itself.
Right. While it's hugely important culturally and theologically for Ethiopia, most historians outside the tradition view it as a foundational legend, a theological narrative compiled centuries after the events it describes, not necessarily a literal historical account of the 10th century BC.
And archaeology hasn't helped, despite digs in Axum.
No, there's been archaeological work done in the region, but nothing has ever been unearthed that directly corroborates the presence of the Ark there, or its journey.
And then there's the silence in the Bible about it going to Ethiopia.
Correct. The biblical narrative just stops before 586 BC. There's no mention of it being taken south. Most non-Ethiopian theories focus on it being hidden somewhere near Jerusalem before the destruction, or perhaps even destroyed by the Babylonians.
So the historical and archaeological records, as presented in these sources, they don't line up with the tradition.
From an external empirical perspective, no, they don't. Which leads directly to the biggest challenge for anyone trying to investigate this claim.
The inaccessibility.
Exactly. We keep coming back to it. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church stands firm. No one from the outside gets to see or examine the object in the chapel of the tablet. Not scholars, not journalists, not even leaders from other faiths.
And their reasoning remains theological.
Yes. It's too holy, too sacred, potentially dangerous. They invoke Uzzah. They see allowing examination as a form of profanation, disrespecting God's mystery. Secrecy is reverence, in their view.
Even high-ranking Ethiopian officials can't just go take a look.
Reportedly, no. Access is solely for the guardian.
So you have this fundamental clash. The modern demand for evidence versus a deeply held religious conviction that insists on sacred secrecy.
That's the heart of the debate. For skeptics, the secrecy naturally breeds suspicion. What are they hiding? Is it even the original Ark, or a later replica, or something else entirely?
But for believers, that same secrecy confirms its unique holiness. It's not supposed to be subjected to worldly tests.
Right. It reinforces the idea that this is something beyond ordinary understanding, demanding faith, not proof.
This makes it clear that the Ark's significance in Ethiopia goes way beyond just being an artifact, real or claimed. It's tied into their very identity.
Massively so. It's not just a relic in a chapel. It's a cornerstone symbol of Ethiopia's divine favor, its unique destiny, its place in salvation history. It's inseparable from their national consciousness.
That Kebra story, again, it positions Ethiopia as the spiritual successor to Israel, inheriting God's covenant through the Ark.
Which gives them this perceived special status. Combined with their incredibly ancient Christian roots, going back to the 4th century, the Ark narrative reinforces the idea that Ethiopia is a uniquely chosen, spiritually significant nation, a custodian of sacred trust.
And historically, it's been linked to their sovereignty, hasn't it? Like a divine shield.
Yes, there's a strong element of that. A belief that the Ark's presence has provided spiritual protection, contributing to Ethiopia's remarkable history of independence, particularly against colonial powers. It's a deep source of national pride.
Being this ancient indigenous Christian nation in Africa.
Exactly. And the Ark is central to that narrative. It places them at this fascinating crossroads of Judaism and Christianity, guardians of the Old Covenant who embrace the New, with the Ark physically linking those two realities.
Does this translate into a sense of unique spiritual authority?
In Ethiopian tradition, yes. It suggests God bestowed a special favor, maybe even a spiritual authority, comparable to the great ancient centers like Jerusalem or Rome. Their tradition is seen as uniquely authentic because of this perceived direct connection via the Ark.
And you see this reflected in their everyday worship.
All the time. In the liturgy, the church architecture, often mirroring the temple layout, the rituals, and especially, as we discussed, the absolute centrality of the tablet in every single church.
The tablet acting as that constant local reminder of the Ark in Axum.
And in the processions like Timkat and the profound importance of making a pilgrimage to Axum itself.
A pilgrimage that's not just tourism, but a spiritual reconnection.
It's seen as a way to encounter that holiness, reaffirm Ethiopia's special role, and symbolically return to the roots of their faith as guardians of the Ark. It constantly reinforces that unique identity.
Given all this, the mystery, the history, the deep faith, it's no surprise this story has captured international attention.
Huge amounts of attention, especially in waves over the centuries. The combination of the Lost Ark, one of history's ultimate mysteries, with this specific ongoing claim in Ethiopia is irresistible.
People have tried to investigate, haven't they? Explorers,
Oh,
writers,
yes. James Bruce, back in the 18th century, was one of the first Europeans to really bring the Ethiopian claim to wider notice.
and and more recently, Graham Hancock's book, The Sign and the Seal in the 90s. That made a big splash.
It really did. Hancock explored the possibility, proposed theories about how it might have gotten there, potentially via Jewish communities in Egypt. It reignited global interest.
But did he get to see it?
No. Like others before and since, including researchers like Adrian Gilbert, they encountered the same immovable obstacle, the church's refusal to grant access for examination.
The theological barrier remains absolute. The Ark is too sacred for scientific scrutiny.
That's the consistent position. So these expeditions and investigations, while they raised awareness, they ultimately couldn't verify the claim. The mystery endures precisely because of the inaccessibility.
And popular culture has definitely run with it.
Oh, absolutely. You can't talk about the Ark without thinking of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right. Spielberg's film. Totally fictional, of course, but it cemented the idea of the Ark as this incredibly powerful, lost, maybe dangerous object in the global imagination.
And there have been numerous documentaries, National Geographic, BBC, exploring the Ethiopian tradition. They present the story, interview people, capture the atmosphere, but always end up highlighting the lack of proof due to the secrecy.
Books, too. Both scholarly analyses and popular fiction often weave it in.
It's just got all the ingredients, hasn't it? A profound religious mystery, claims of divine power, deep historical roots, an unsolved puzzle.
The Ark is arguably one of the most legendary sacred objects ever conceived. And the Ethiopian claim adds this layer of it being hidden in plain sight almost.
Protected in secret for maybe millennia. It fascinates believers, researchers, and just the curious public alike. And that secrecy, far from killing the story.
Just makes it more compelling. So wrapping up this deep dive, it's crystal clear that the Ark of the Covenant, whether physically present or not, holds immense undeniable significance in Ethiopia.
It's the ultimate symbol of God's presence and covenant for them. It's fused with their spiritual identity, their national identity. It shapes their worship, their holiest sites, their most vibrant celebrations like Timkat, the reverence for the Tabat.
But that fundamental question, where is the original Ark, remains unanswered. A true enigma.
The debate continues. You have the skepticism rooted in the lack of verifiable external evidence, bumping up against the profound, unwavering faith of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which insists that secrecy is paramount.
It ensures the Ark remains purely a matter of faith, doesn't it? Not something you can prove or disprove in a lab.
Precisely. And from the Ethiopian perspective, as reflected in the sources, this belief isn't something that needs outside validation. It's a spiritual truth nurtured by tradition for, well, let's say close to 3,000 years.
It reflects a worldview where some mysteries are sacred, meant to be revered, not dissected.
Exactly. Embraced through faith and tradition, not necessarily through empirical investigation.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over, drawing from everything we've discussed based on these sources. Since the object in Axum remains hidden, its identity unverified by the wider world.
Perhaps the enduring power of the Ark in Ethiopia isn't really about where the physical object is, or even absolute certainty about what it is. Maybe its real power lies in the incredible faith it continues to inspire, the unique and rich traditions it has shaped over centuries, and the profound sense of identity it still provides for millions of people.